Hey, what's going on guys? Jason here again, and in this video I'll be creating another React app for you guys. So I'll be creating a Pokemon API React app, and what it does is basically it's a React app that gets data from the Pokemon API and it renders it out on the page along with all of the Pokemon information. So we'll display the information here in a grid with some cards. So each card will have a particular Pokemon's data. So in this case, if we look here, we'll have a sprite image, also the name and its type, along with some other information like the weight, height, and ability. So we'll be building that out. We'll also have some pagination here to basically go on to the next page of Pokemon. So if we want to go to the next page, we can click next and it'll go on to the next page and fetch the next set of Pokemon. And again, and if you notice real quick, you see a loading screen there. So that's just indicating it's making that fetch. So it's taking a little bit of time to get the data. So we can keep going to the next one. And then we can go back to the previous page until we get to the very first page there. So that's what we'll be building out. And for this project, we'll be using React hooks as well. So that'll be pretty cool. So we'll be doing that. So hopefully you guys will learn a lot in this project with React. And yeah, so let's get into it. So first thing I want to do is make this smaller here. And another thing I wanted to make a note of is I won't actually be coding out the CSS. So I'll show you the CSS that I have here on the screen. And I also have a link to the GitHub repo, so you guys can just go ahead and copy the CSS. That way we can just focus on the JSX markup and the data fetching and all of that. But yeah, so that link will be in the description below, and you can go to that link and go ahead and clone it or just copy the code if you want. So yeah, so if we go in here, I basically made this app using Create React App. So if you go into your terminal, all you would need to do is do a, let's see. So you would just need to do, well, make sure you have Node installed, and then you can do npx create React app. Create React app, and then after that you'll do the name of the project. You can name it whatever you want. So I already did that, so we don't need to worry about it. And I can go ahead and close that out. So this is the current Create React app that we have. And so if we look into our VS Code, we have the standard Create React app. I didn't delete anything, but I did actually add a few things in here. So I have this components folder that I added, and in there I added two other folders, and I named this one card and the other one navbar. So this will be the card component and the navbar component that we will have that you saw on the screen earlier. So you don't have to worry about building this out right now. We'll get to that at a later point, but just so you know, this is what it would look like. It will just be a folder with 3 files. It'll be an index.js file, a card.js file, and the style.css, and the navbar will have a similar setup as well. So that'll be that. And we'll go ahead and start in our app.js file. So in our app.js file, we'll go ahead and remove some of this boilerplate code. And let's see, so we'll have that. And we can go ahead and remove this class name. All right, so up at the top, I want to import a few things. I'll import use state and use effect. And we'll be making use of both of these in our app. So use state will contain the state for our React application, and use effect will be a lifecycle method in our app to handle some functionality in our app after the component renders out to the DOM. So first thing I'll do then is in here, I'll go ahead and set up our state variables. So I'll do a const and then do an array there, and in there I'll pass in, let's see, the first thing we want to pass in will be Pokemon data. So this will just be the essentially the Pokemon data that we get from the API. So Pokemon data, and then set Pokemon data, and then we'll do useState, and the initial state I want to just pass in an empty array. And then for the next one, I'll do another piece of state that we want to store. This one we'll do the next URL, and then we'll do set next URL. And so this second variable here, this is basically going to be the function that we call when we're going to update our state in our React app. So we have next URL is where we will store the URL for the next set of Pokemon data that we need to get. And then we have our set next URL there. So we'll do useState, and then we'll set an initial value to an empty string. And then we'll also have a prev URL. So that'll be another URL that will be the previous page that we got from our API, Pokemon API data. So then we'll do set prev URL, and then use state. Okay. And I'll also have another state here. It'll be loading, set loading. So this will be the this will be handling the loading state whenever we're fetching data from the API. So the initial state I'll give it will be true. All right. And then I'll create a variable here. This one I'll just call initial URL. And this will just be a variable. This will be a string for the URL endpoint that we'll be hitting. So in this case, we'll be using this endpoint here. So if you go to the Pokemon data, this page has all the information and all the different things you can fetch from the Pokemon API. What we'll be using will be this API endpoint. So we can go ahead and copy that, and then we'll put that in there. Okay, cool. So the next thing we want to do then is we want to make use of useEffect, and useEffect will take in two arguments. First one will be a function, and the second argument will be a dependency array. So useEffect here will pretty much run like in the older versions of React, like component did mount. So basically, whenever the component mounts to the page, we are going to run this useEffect. So since we have an empty array here, all that means is basically we don't have any dependencies in there. So that means that we're only going to run this one time. So that's going to run after the component mounts to the page. And after that, it won't run again. So when the component mounts to the page, we want to essentially then fetch our data from the API. So in the useEffect function, then what I want to do is I want to actually create another function. I'll call it async, and I'll call it fetch data. And then in fetch data, what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and do a let, await. Let's see here. Oh, sorry, that is wrong. So it'll be a variable called response, and then we'll do await, and then we'll do get all Pokemon, and then we'll pass in the initial URL. All right, and so get all Pokemon, this function has not been created yet, so we'll be creating this function, and this function will basically just handle the fetching of the Pokemon API data. So we can go ahead and do that right now. So in our source folder, I'll go ahead and create a services folder, and then in there I'll just call this Pokemon.js. All right, so then in Pokemon.js, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to export it, and this will be called, get all Pokemon. And this will be a function, and this will take a URL, so it'll be the endpoint that we pass in there. And so this is also going to be async, And then I want to, let's see, what we're getting here is yes expected. So export async function. Oops, my mistake. I need to add this function here. There we go. All right, so now in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a new promise. So we'll return a new promise, and then in here, it'll have a few parameters. It'll be resolve and reject. And then we'll go ahead and start creating our function. So when we call this get all Pokemon function will return a promise, and that promise will then resolve with the data that we get back from the API. So in here, what I want to do is call fetch with the URL, and then we'll do a .then. We'll do a res.json, and then that'll also return a promise. So then that's when we get our data back from the API. So then after that, what we want to do is just call resolve and pass in that data. So then that'll return the data for the Pokemon API. So we'll save that, and then we go back in our app.js. So in here, we can now go ahead and finish out this fetch function. So response is going to be the response that we get back from the Pokemon endpoint. So it'll basically be this response right here. And so then what I can do is I'll go ahead, if you notice in our response here, so we'll be getting all of this back. There's these two properties called next and previous. So these will reference the pages for the next set of Pokemon data that we'll need. So we'll go ahead and set our next URL and then pass in response dot next. And then in here, we'll do set prev URL, pass in response dot previous. All right, cool. And then we'll do set loading. Set loading will then set that to false because we have gotten our data back from the API. Okay, cool. And then in here, I can just do a grab our loading variable there. So we'll do some ternary operation. So if loading is true, then what I want to do is go ahead and add a loading text there, indicating that loading is currently loading. Else, meaning since we're not loading anymore, that would indicate that we got the data back from the API. So in here, I can do this, and I can just for now, I'll just do another h1. Data is fetched. Okay. So cool. All right. So then here, and my mistake, I have to do a, let's see, I have to call this a function. So we'll do a function fetch data. There we go. So then down here, that's where we created the function. We'll just go ahead and call it fetch data. And now we should be good to go. Let's see. I'll go ahead and also just console.log here to log out that data. Make sure we're getting it back. Oh, sorry, not data, but response. There we go. All right, save that. Okay. And also I forgot to actually import our get all Pokemon function. So we'll need to do get all Pokemon from services, services / Pokemon. There we go. Whoops, let's get rid of that. All right, so there's our data is fetched. So that means we did get our data back. And let's go ahead and see what we have here. And yep, so there is the information. So yeah, so there's our data back. So that looks like it's working correctly. All right, cool. So then let's see. So next thing then I want to do is basically, as you can see, we are getting data back. So if we look in results, we are getting this array of objects, which is referencing a particular Pokemon. But as you can see, we're actually not getting all of the Pokemon data that we need, like the weight, abilities, and all of that. All we get is the name and also the URL endpoint to that particular Pokemon. So if we go to this endpoint here, go ahead and copy that and make that request. So this endpoint will actually have the data that we need. So then what we want to do is we basically want to take this results array and we want to loop or iterate over this array. And for each Pokemon object, for each Pokemon in that array, we want to go ahead and fetch that Pokemon data from this endpoint. So, and once we fetch that data, we want to take that response and then store it into an array and store it in our React state. So that's the next thing that we'll be doing. So if we go back into our app, the way we will do that will be to create another function. Let's see. So down here, we'll go ahead and do a wait, and then I'll do loading Pokemon. So we'll do loading Pokemon, and in there we'll pass the response.results. So we'll be passing this results array there. And then we'll create that loading Pokemon function. Whoops, so I'll do this. And then loading Pokemon will take in some data. Let's see, so it'll take in some data. This is actually going to be an async function as well. So we'll be doing some async await in here as well. And the next thing I'll do is I'll create a variable, call it underscore Pokemon. This will be a local Pokemon array. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do await promise.all. So promise.all, and basically what this does is it's basically going to take in an array of promises, and it's going to return that array once all those promises have resolved. And so in promise.all, what we'll pass in is we'll take in data, and remember data is going to be an array of objects. It's going to be this right here. Then we'll do a map, so we're going to map through those. And then we're going to pass in a function to map to iterate over. So this function will actually be async. So it'll be async, and we'll reference each object as Pokemon. And then remember data.map will return an array. So in here you have to return some type of thing that will then put it into an array. And at the end it'll return an array. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another variable. I'll call it Pokemon record. So Pokemon record, and then I'll do an await, and then I'll do get Pokemon. Oops, not get all Pokemon, but do get Pokemon. And get Pokemon, and we'll pass in the Pokemon object. All right. And so get Pokemon is a function that we haven't created yet. So this will be another service function that will basically make a fetch to the Pokemon API for us. And it's actually going to be in here. So in here, in the Pokemon.js file, I'll go ahead and export another function, and I'll call it get Pokemon. And then in here, let's see, so we're going to then pass in the URL we gave it. And then again, like the one above, it'll return a promise. And then we'll have our parameters resolve, reject, and okay. And then here we'll do another fetch. So we're gonna actually fetch that data. So here we're actually going to fetch, so we're going to be iterating over each one of these objects, and we're then going to fetch this URL endpoint for each Pokemon. So that's what that will be doing. And then we'll do a then. So we have a then res.json .then data. So then we get the data back, and then we'll go ahead and resolve data. All right, save that. And then, okay, so then inside our load Pokemon function, we were going to then go ahead and finish this out. So in here, so we're calling the get Pokemon service function that we created. That's going to give us the Pokemon data, all of the data that we need. And then we'll just store it in this variable. And then down here, we'll go ahead and return that variable, Pokemon record. So that looks good. And so then now down here, once we fetch all the Pokemon, all the data that we need, and then store, and all of that data is going to be an array of objects that will be stored in this variable called Pokemon. So once we iterate over all of these and make our fetch for each one of these Pokemon, and then once it's sorted to the array, then we're going to take that array and we're going to store it in our React state. So that's where we will call set Pokemon data and pass in Pokemon. Let me call this data just so it makes a little bit more sense. So let's see, so set Pokemon, there we go. Okay, so that looks good. And then let's see, so everything is looking good so far. I believe that's all we need. So now we can go ahead and do, let's see. So I'll go ahead and console.log our loading Pokemon here. So I'll just go ahead and call this Pokemon. And then we'll go ahead and just console.log it just to make sure everything is looking good. All right, so we have an error. Let's see, get Pokemon is not defined. Of course, we did not import it. So get Pokemon, there we go. And let's see. So we're getting this loading and it's still loading. And I believe we need to, let's see here. All right, guys, so I actually made a mistake. So my apologies. Inside here, if you look at get Pokemon, we actually need to pass in Pokemon.url because our get Pokemon function takes in a URL, and we were just passing in this Pokemon object that has a property called URL, but we weren't actually passing it. So that's what we need to do there to fix that. And so if we save that and we go back, and you can see the data is fetched. So let's go ahead and just console.log the Pokemon data. And remember, that's what we have here. So once we get all the data, then we're gonna, then we set the state on our Pokemon data. So then if we console.log, we can go ahead and see the data. So there's our array of objects of our Pokemon. And each Pokemon, as you can see, has all these extra properties that we will make use of. So cool, now that we actually have the data, the next thing we can do now is render it out to the screen. So let's go ahead and do that. And let me fix this. All right, so let me reformat that real quick. Okay, so then in here, All right, so then what I'm going to do now is basically I'm going to render out the cards. So in here first, what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and do a React fragment there. And then in here, what I'm going to do then is do a div dot grid container. And then down here, so inside here is where we will actually render out the cards. So then what we need to do is do a Pokemon data. We're going to map through that. And then we're going to take each Pokemon right there, give the I index. And then in there, we'll go ahead and return our card component. And then we'll give it a key of I. And then we will also give it another property called, we'll just call it Pokemon, and then pass in the Pokemon object. So card component, this needs to be imported. So if we go up here, do an import card from, go ahead and look at our path here. So we're going to go into components and components slash card, and that should be all we need. All right, cool. So let's see, that looks, what is this? So expected that, remove that. All right, so then now we'll just actually have to build out the card component. So for the card component, what we need to do is first, let's go ahead and go into index. So we'll just do import card from card. There we go. Export default card. And then in card.js, we will go ahead and set it up. So we'll do import React from React. This will be a functional component. It'll take in some props. We'll actually destructure that to just grab the Pokemon prop there. All right. And then we will return some markup. So first thing, it'll just be an outer div. We'll call it, we'll give it a class of card. And then it'll have a few child divs. So the first one, we'll call it card with a class of card underscore underscore image. And then this one will be another div of a class of card underscore underscore name. And then div dot card types. And then this will have another child div of div dot card underscore underscore info. There we go. So then let's go ahead and set this up here for the image. We'll have an image tag. The source will be from the Pokemon object, and we'll be doing Pokemon.sprites.front default. So if you look into the Pokemon object, you'll see that there is a sprite or image here that you can use. So that's where that comes from. The name, we will just go ahead and do Pokemon.name, I believe. And then let me just open this up just so we can visualize it. And then in here, in types, remember we had a card and it had types, so it had two types, so we want to render those out. So if you look in here, there's a types property, which is an array of objects with the types, and it has each item has a type property with a name property, so we'll be grabbing that. So then for that, we'll just go ahead and do Pokemon.types. types.map, and then we want to loop over that. Let's see here, and I have to wrap this in a curly brace. So then we're going through types. So we're looping over types, which is an array. And for each one of these, we want to go ahead and return a div, give it a class of type card type. And then in here, we'll go ahead and pass, let's see, so it'll be type dot, if you look in here, type, we want to grab type dot name. So type dot name, there we go. And let's see, so we have that. Okay, I think that should be good for that. And the next thing, we'll go ahead and add the card info. So card info will have a few child divs. So this will be card data. Let's see, card data dash weight. So this will be the weight, and then that'll just be the Pokemon dot weight. And sorry, I need to wrap this in p tags. And then let's see. So this will actually have a class of title. Call it weight. And let's see. So the next one, we'll go ahead and just, so we'll save that. Go ahead and copy this and just change this to, let's see, to height. And then we'll do height there. We'll do height there. Copy it again. Ability, and then change that to ability. And then we'll just change this prop there to ability. And as you can see, that is in here as well. Oh, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. So this is not what we want to do. In here, if you look at abilities, it's actually an array, but we're only going to output the first ability that it has instead of doing another map and all of that. So here, this is actually called abilities. It's an array, so we'll grab the first item in there, and then we'll grab the ability.name. So as you can see, we're grabbing that first item, grabbing that ability prop, and grabbing that name. All right, so that looks good. And yeah, so let's go ahead and let's see, export default this card. All right, so let's save that. And here, save this, and let's see what we get. All right, cool. So we're actually getting some data. We're getting all of the information. The only thing is the styling is a little bit off. So let's make sure our styling is all there. Oh, I believe the styling. Oh yeah, so it is there. Oh yeah, so one thing I forgot to do is you need to actually import that style sheet into your cards, into your function components file. So you'll do import style.css, and then we can go ahead and save that. And then in app.js, I believe I believe that's all good. So that's looking good there. So all of that's looking good there. Let's see. So now let's see if there's any styling issues that I missed. All right, so my mistake. Actually, this should be lowercase name, not uppercase. So now we actually have that properly styled there. All right, so another thing that I also forgot to add is in the index.css file. I'll just go on body and go ahead and add the background color. So this one will be, let's see, DCD, DCD, CDC. There we go. All right, cool. So that's looking good. Then let's see. So then I'll go ahead and add the navbar real quick. So we'll do an import navbar from navbar. There we go. We'll do an export of navbar. Export defaults of navbar. And then we'll go ahead and do a import React from React function navbar. We'll go ahead and export default. And then we'll go ahead and do, let's see. We'll go ahead and add the navbar here. So this will just be a div. And then if we, let's see. So I believe it was Pokemon API that we added in there. So Pokemon API, and it's pretty simple. So in navbar, we also have to give this a navbar class. So we got to do navbar class right there. Let's see what we get. And also, before I forget, I need to import it into our main app.js. So if I do navbar from navbar, and then we want to, let's see, so that we have that, go ahead and save that. All right, so we imported navbar. Looks like on our navbar component, we need to add our return here. So go in here. And that should be good. And then, so let's see. So then in here, what I want to do is I want to just go ahead and input that navbar. So add it at the top there. So we'll do navbar. Like that. And navbar styles, and also of course we need to import our styles for the navbar. So we'll do navbar, I'm sorry, not navbars, dot slash style dot css. So there is our navbar, looking good. Cool. All right, so we are almost finished. The last thing is now just to add that pagination there. So what we want to do then is we want to go ahead and create a function here. So this one, we'll go ahead and call it, we'll just call it next. And then next. So next will be an async function. So when we call next, we want to set loading to true. And then we'll create a variable here, call it data, and then we'll do an await, and we'll call our getAllPokemon service function to get the data, and then we'll pass in the next URL, which is a state variable in our React app, which has the next URL endpoint for the next page. So we're going to fetch that, put it on that data variable, and then the next thing we'll do is we'll call our await load Pokemon. Whoops, not load options, load. Let's see, load Pokemon. Yep, so loading Pokemon, and then pass in the data. And let's see, so I'm sorry, not data, data.results. And then after that, we'll do set next URL. And we'll do, well, from the data that we got back, we want to set the next URL to the new one. So it'll be data.next, and then set prev, we'll set that to the data.previous. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and set loading to false here because we already got the data back. That looks good. And then we'll go ahead and we can pretty much copy most of that. And then this one we'll call prev. And it'll be pretty similar. There'll be a difference though. So in previous, we're going to actually check if prev URL. Oops, sorry, not one. There you go. So if prev URL is false, meaning there's no more previous pages, we just want to go ahead and return that. And if not, we'll just go ahead and do what we were doing up at the top there, calling data, await, setting our next URLs, previous URLs as well. So that should all work the same. Here we need to change this to prev URL. There we go. And let's see, so I think that's good. Now we'll just add the markup for our buttons. So let's see, so in here, under navbar, I'll go ahead and add a div with the class of btn, add a button there, and this one will be prev. This one will have an onClick of, let's see, and we'll pass in our function for prev, and then we'll add in our next one, so it'll be next, and we'll call our next function there. And we can go ahead and copy this, and we'll put one here at the bottom as well. There we go. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Moment of truth. So here's all our Pokemon data. If we click next, it is loading, as you can see, and it's getting all the data. So if we click next again, everything is working correctly. So if we go back, we are not able to fetch the previous data anymore. So let's see. All right. So as you can see here on our page, we have those buttons. So we can click next. It'll fetch the next information there. For the Pokemon, we can go back. It'll fetch the previous. There we go. And one thing I also need to do real quick is just make sure these colors match up with the type of Pokemon that we need. So for that, all we need to do is, what I'll do is create another file here. I'll call this, let's see, inside source, call this helpers. In helpers, I'll go ahead and create a file, call it Pokemon types.js. And in here, I actually have this right here copied, so I'll just go ahead and copy that. And sorry, the spacing is a little bit weird, but yeah, basically it's going to be a object that'll have all of these properties. So if it's a bug type, dragon, or any of these, it'll reference these colors. So then if we go into our card component, we can then go ahead and change the card type. So in here, we want to actually give it a some styling, so we'll do a style, and we are going to do background color, and background color will be set to, before I forget, we need to import that object, so Pokemon type from helpers / Pokemon types. So Pokemon type, so background color will be Pokemon type, and that's going to be an object. And then we want to grab the color of the type of Pokemon that we are getting. So in here, we'll just go ahead and pass in type dot name, and let's see. So that should be good. So it's going to grab the particular name of that Pokemon for that type, and then in here inside our Pokemon type, it's going to look for that name and give it that particular color that we need for that particular type. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and save it. And now we have the colors matching all the types. So that's looking good. And yeah, so that is the project, guys. Let's go ahead and expand it. So cool. So that's a project, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you guys like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.